The belt dug into my throat like it was made of fire, not leather. My father's face hovered inches from mine, red and twisted, veins like ropes across his forehead. "Ungrateful brat," he spat, tightening the strap until stars scattered across my vision. I clawed at the belt, legs kicking against the hardwood floor, the room spinning into a blur of shadows and rage. I remember the smell first, iron from my own blood where the buckle scraped my skin. Then the silence, sudden and deafening when my body gave up and the fight left my limbs. When I opened my eyes, it wasn't his face I saw. It was fluorescent light. White tiles. A mask pulled tight over a stranger's face as a nurse leaned over me. The words came muffled as though I were underwater. "He's not stable. Prepare oxygen." The doctors told me later I wouldn't last the night. My lungs were bruised. My voice shredded into a rasp. And yet, I woke the next morning to the beeping of machines and the bitter taste of air tubes. Alive. Barely. They called it an act of rage. I called it what it was, betrayal. Because I hadn't just lost my breath that night, I lost the illusion that my father was anything but a monster hiding behind a suit and a reputation. The courtroom came weeks later. I sat stiff in the witness stand, collar buttoned high to hide the marks. My voice cracked but I forced it steady. His lawyer painted him as a stressed man, a provider who lost control for just a moment. But then the evidence came. Photographs. Medical reports. The trembling voice of a neighbor who had heard everything through the walls. And when the judge read out the charges, when he listed the injuries and the history that finally spilled out, my father's mask fractured. I watched his hands tremble. The same hands that had pressed leather against my windpipe. I should have felt relief. Instead, what I felt was something colder. Because the trial wasn't just about him. It was about me. About whether anyone would believe that the scars across my throat were not accidents, not exaggerations. The room hushed as the judge leaned forward, eyes fixed on my father. And what he said next turned the courtroom into chaos. "The court has reviewed not only the medical evidence," the judge said, his tone sharp as a blade, "but also the financial records. Mr. Calloway, where is the $260,000 you claimed was used for your son's care?" The words dropped like a stone into water. The gallery erupted, murmurs, gasps, a shuffle of shoes against polished floors. My father's jaw slackened, his eyes darting from the judge to his attorney like a cornered animal. I froze. $260,000? That number spun in my head like a coin tossed in the air. The Social Security benefits. The survivor's support after my mother's death. Money meant for me, food, education, a future. Instead, it had disappeared into expenses. I remembered nights eating reheated noodles, my shoes falling apart at the seams while he drove home in a new car. The judge tapped his gavel once. "Answer the question." My father leaned forward, his voice suddenly meek. "Investments, life costs, it was complicated." "Complicated," the judge repeated, each syllable dripping disbelief. I had braced myself for denial of the violence. I hadn't prepared for this, the public unmasking of his greed. My throat tightened, not from leather this time but from something heavier. Years of gaslighting collapsed under the weight of numbers on a page. In the corner of the courtroom, I caught the eye of Mrs. Adler, our old neighbor. She had testified earlier, voice trembling, about hearing the shouting through the walls. She gave me the faintest nod, like a small lantern in a long tunnel. For once, I wasn't invisible. The prosecutor pressed forward. "Mr. Calloway, you demanded this young man pay for his meals, his clothes, even rent, as though he were a tenant, not your son. And yet you conveniently failed to disclose the benefits you collected. How do you explain that?" My father's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, shuffling papers as if answers might leap from the pages. But the truth sat naked in the silence. I thought about the belt. About the way he hissed "ungrateful," as if gratitude meant obedience, silence, submission. And I realized he hadn't just tried to choke me. He had tried to erase me, to make me nothing more than a burden he could invoice. The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. "This is more than cruelty. This is theft. This is betrayal at its most personal." The room went silent again. My father's face drained pale. And that was when the bailiff stepped forward with something that made every head turn. The bailiff carried a worn envelope, edges yellowed, as if it had been hidden away for years. He placed it gently on the judge's bench. "This was recovered during the investigation, Your Honor," he said. The judge slid the papers out slowly. The silence was suffocating. I watched his eyes move line by line, his brows knitting tighter with each word. Then he looked at me. "These are letters, statements your mother wrote before she passed." My chest constricted. My mother. Her handwriting had always looped softly, like music lingering on paper. I hadn't seen it in years. The judge read aloud, "For the record, I want it known that the survivor benefits are for my son's well-being. His future. His education. They are not to be touched for personal gain." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My father slumped back, eyes glassy, lips pressed thin. I stared at the floor, heart pounding. She had fought for me even from beyond the grave. And he had stolen not just money but her last wishes. The prosecutor seized the moment. "Your Honor, these documents prove intent. The funds were not only misused, they were deliberately diverted." I could barely hear over the ringing in my ears. A memory slipped in uninvited. My father standing at the kitchen counter, sliding crisp bills into an envelope, tucking it into his jacket while telling me we couldn't afford electricity that month. I had believed him. My fists clenched. Not from rage this time, but from the weight of a truth finally visible to everyone. The judge set the letter down, his voice like thunder. "Mr. Calloway, you not only abused your child physically, you betrayed his mother's final trust. This court will not ignore that." Gasps broke again. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. And for the first time in my life my father looked small. But even then, a part of me trembled, not from fear of him anymore but from the question twisting inside. What happens to a son when justice finally arrives? Justice, I thought, would feel like air rushing into my lungs after years of suffocation. But instead it arrived slowly, measured, in the judge's voice as he outlined the charges. Fraud, child endangerment, aggravated assault. Each word echoed like the toll of a church bell, final and unyielding. My father sat there, his tie loosened, sweat streaking down the lines of his face. I used to think he was invincible, the kind of man who could walk into a room and bend it to his will. But now the bend was gone. He was brittle, cracking under the weight of evidence, of voices he could no longer silence. The prosecutor requested restitution. The funds misappropriated must be accounted for. We ask for a financial freeze and a full audit. My father's lawyer tried to object, his words tumbling, desperate. "This is excessive. He's already facing." The judge cut him off. Excessive as a father choking his son while pocketing money meant for his care. His gavel struck once, sharp and final. I felt every pair of eyes in that courtroom shift toward me. Not pitying, not dismissive. Seeing. And it was that recognition more than any verdict that made my throat tighten. For years I had been invisible, a shadow cowering in the house my father owned. Now I was here, my scars turned into testimony, my silence broken into something undeniable. Still, I couldn't escape the weight of contradiction. He had destroyed me, but he had also raised me. He had stolen, but he had also provided. He was my father, but also my enemy. As if sensing my thoughts, the defense tried a new tactic. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "this man provided food, shelter, clothing. Yes, mistakes were made. But without him, this young man would have had nothing." The words scraped against me like gravel. Nothing? I remembered my mother's letter. Her careful handwriting. Her plea for my future. She had given me everything in her final act of love, and he had squandered it. The judge looked back at me. "Would you like to speak?" he asked. The air thickened. My chest burned. And as I rose from the witness stand, every face turned, waiting. My legs felt heavy as I walked to the center of the courtroom. The microphone sat in front of me like an invitation, or a trap. My throat still carried faint ridges from the belt, pale scars I touched absent-mindedly whenever fear clawed too close. I leaned forward, breath shaky, voice raw but steady. "You say he gave me food and shelter," I began, my eyes locked on the defense attorney. "But what is food if it comes with bruises? What is shelter if it feels like a cage?" The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I looked at my father then, his eyes wide, pleading but not with love. With desperation. He wanted to save himself, not me. I didn't want to believe it, I continued. I told myself for years that maybe he was just stressed, maybe I deserved it. That's what he always said. I was ungrateful, I was a burden. But the truth is, he stole from me. Not just money. Not just air from my lungs. He stole my childhood. He stole my mother's trust. A woman in the gallery sniffled. I caught sight of Mrs. Adler again, her hands clasped tight against her chest. The judge watched me, unblinking, as though weighing not just my words but the years behind them. And yet, I paused, surprising myself. I don't stand here asking for revenge. I stand here asking for recognition. That what he did was real. That I wasn't crazy. That the bruises meant something. That my mother's words meant something. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. So when you pass judgment, don't do it for me alone. Do it for her. For the voice she left behind in those letters. Silence pressed in again. My father's lawyer shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My father, for once, had no words at all. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I stepped back, my body trembling, knees weak but lighter somehow. For the first time, I hadn't just survived. I had spoken. And as I lowered myself into the seat again, the prosecutor rose with one last piece of evidence that no one in the courtroom had expected. The prosecutor held up a small, battered object. At first, it looked insignificant, a rusted key on a faded red string. My breath caught. I hadn't seen it in years. This, the prosecutor said, pacing toward the jury, was recovered from a lockbox in Mr. Calloway's home. Inside were records of personal expenditures, trips, luxury items, investments, all paid with the survivor benefits meant for his son. This key was hidden behind a false panel in his study. The red string glowed under the courtroom lights, tugging at a memory I had buried deep. I was 8 when my mother tied that very string around the key. I remember her whispering, "This unlocks something important for you one day. Promise me you'll keep it safe." But I had lost it after she died. My father must have taken it. A strange ache filled my chest. That key wasn't just evidence. It was a fragment of her resurfacing at the exact moment truth demanded it. The defense scrambled. Your Honor, this proves nothing but a man's attempt to keep financial records private. Private? The prosecutor snapped. He concealed them to mask theft. And he did it with the very symbol his late wife left for their son. The jury shifted, whispers breaking out. My father lowered his eyes as if the weight of that red string finally bent his spine. The judge lifted the key delicately, almost reverently. Sometimes objects carry more truth than words. This court accepts the evidence. I stared at the red string, my throat tightening with a mix of grief and wonder. It was as though my mother had reached through time, pulling threads until her voice was heard. The judge cleared his throat, voice sharp again. Mr. Calloway, your deceit is undeniable. Your violence unforgivable. This court will prepare sentencing accordingly. A low murmur swept through the gallery, reporters scribbling faster, the weight of a scandal fully exposed. My father slumped further, face pale as parchment. And yet, sitting there, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not rage, but a hollow quiet. Because when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't always heal. Sometimes it simply leaves space for the grief you never had time to feel. The courtroom adjourned for the day, but I remained in my seat long after the gavel fell. People drifted out in murmurs, their shoes clicking against the marble floor, but I sat frozen, watching my father being led away in cuffs. The sound of chains rattling around his wrists struck me harder than the belt ever had. For years I had imagined this moment. Him powerless, me free. But the freedom I felt was strange, fragile, like glass that could shatter with a breath. Reporters swarmed the hallway outside. Flashes of cameras lit up the corridor when I finally stepped out. A voice called, "Do you feel justice has been served?" Another shouted, "What do you want to say to your father now?" I kept walking. My voice had been taken from me once. I wasn't going to let strangers twist it into sound bites. Outside, the sky was heavy with rain clouds. The first drops hit my face as I stood on the courthouse steps. For a moment I closed my eyes and listened. Rain against stone, cool and relentless, washing away the heat of the day. Mrs. Adler found me there. Her umbrella tilted slightly, covering half of me, half of her. She didn't speak at first. She just pressed a small thermos into my hand. "Tea," she said quietly. "Still black the way your mother liked it." I almost laughed, a broken, startled laugh. "You still drink it black?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Always," she said, and for a moment I felt less alone. That night, I lay in bed with the key and red string on my nightstand. I turned it over in my hand, the metal cold, the string frayed with time. It felt like a lifeline. Or maybe a reminder. Sleep didn't come easily. I dreamt of my mother's voice calling from another room, of the kitchen light flickering, of my father's shadow looming tall. But then I dreamt of something else. The key glowing faintly, unlocking a door I had never seen before. On the other side was silence, but not the suffocating kind. The kind that feels like peace. And when I woke, I knew the trial wasn't the end. It was only the threshold. Sentencing day arrived with gray skies, as though the weather itself carried the weight of what was about to unfold. I sat near the front, the key on its red string tucked safely in my pocket. My father shuffled in, his suit wrinkled, his face hollow. The man who once towered over me now looked small, swallowed by the very walls that once seemed to protect him. The judge's words came steady: prison time, restitution, a full audit of every stolen dollar. Each decision carved a piece of him away. But I realized something then: justice wasn't the sound of chains or the length of years. Justice was simply being seen. Finally, the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. When the hearing ended, I didn't look at him. Not once. Instead, I walked outside into the drizzle. The air felt sharp, cleansing. Reporters called my name, microphones stretched toward me, but I kept moving. Their questions weren't mine to answer. I stopped at the courthouse steps, pulled the key from my pocket and held it up to the gray light. My mother's handwriting, her plea, her love. They had survived in ways my father never could bury. I whispered into the rain, "I made it, Mom." For the first time in years, the word didn't feel like a lie. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I didn't need to. What I found instead was something quieter, steadier, an acceptance that his shadow no longer defined me. I turned, walked down the steps and let the rain fall. It felt like the closing of one story, and the opening of another I would finally write for myself.